Good evening and a warm welcome to Big Budget Business, where we highlight young, prolific people making strides in their respective fields. Now, in one of our past episodes, we introduced you to the investments that are available for youth to invest in on the Botswana Stock Exchange. And today, we have the market development specialist from the Botswana Stock Exchange, Mr. Kgotla Segwe, who is here to tell us a bit more about how we as young people, whether in business or professional, can invest. Mr. Kgotla Segwe, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure having you, man. So what we'll start with is to get a brief background, anything that you'd like us to know about yourself personally as Kgotla.
All right. First and foremost, I'm a young man of 30 years. I am Kimolete, Kgotla, that's where my father resides from. My mother, Mowana, as you did mention, I'm the market development specialist for the Botswana Stock Exchange. And yeah, pretty much this is the role that I play. Pretty much sensitizing and educating Botswana about the operations of the exchange, either in terms of sensitizing prospective business owners who want to list, or of course the ordinary Botswana who's keen on investing in the products that we offer as the BSC. Right. So that's the gist, or rather the long and short story of who Kgotla is.
All right, okay. And in terms of your choice of study, because I know a lot of people out there want to be where you are, tell us what it is that you might have studied and what inspired that. Yeah.
I think for me, I'm going to give a very honest answer to that question. During my varsity years, I think I was more concentrated in other sort of fields of interest, so to say. So working in capital markets never really crossed my mind. But when you finish your varsity and you come to Botswana, because I was schooling in Malaysia, when I came to Botswana Stock Exchange was one of those companies that, as a young graduate, you want to work for. It's one of the more prominent parastatals under the Ministry of Finance, well, back then. So I applied for the internship, and I didn't exactly expect myself to be engaged or be called upon. So I found myself in a predicament whereby I was called for an interview, and luckily enough, I made it through, and I began my career as an intern at the Botswana Stock Exchange. Now, how I sort of built my love or interest for capital markets was that when you sort of get through the door, you understand how much a lot of Botswana in general do not know about the operations of the stock exchange in terms of awareness levels, in terms of knowing that the BSC is a viable investment avenue that you can sort of compare it with all the traditional forms of investment in Botswana, as well as the business owners. So when I got into the BSC as an intern, that's when I realized that there's a sort of need in Botswana that we need to address as the BSC in terms of educating the people about our operation. So during that point in time, that is where my love sort of grew for capital markets, and I think that's how I sort of blossomed in my role as well once I got to appreciate the job that I was doing.
Lovely.
Yeah.
All right. No, very interesting and insightful there. And I like how you said it might not have been your interest prior to you joining the organization, but once you were in there and you were in the deep end, your love and passion developed.
Exactly.
So if there's something that you at home might want to be starting or getting into, or if it's a job or a business, throw yourself into the deep end and your love might just develop from there.
Exactly.
Right. So now let's get into the stock exchange itself. Maybe give us an idea at home. We'd like to know, what is the stock exchange? Maybe its history, its development, the Botswana one. What are the current state of operations and the like? Yeah.
Okay. All right. First and foremost, our mandate as the Botswana Stock Exchange is to operate and regulate the securities market in Botswana.
Okay.
Essentially, for me to break it down for the listeners back at home, essentially we're a regulated marketplace that brings together companies that are looking to raise capital for growth prospects, as well as individuals, or rather prospective investors that are willing to invest into these companies, hoping to derive some form of returns.
Okay.
When we talk about prospective companies, it also involves government as well, because government does come to the capital markets to raise capital for various reasons. And then when we also talk about investors, we talk about two main types of investors. We talk about retail investors, who are you and I.
Yes.
And then, of course, we have the asset managers who manage these money for the pension funds. So essentially, that is where we sort of come in. We provide that infrastructure whereby we bring these two different parties together in an efficient and a very transparent manner in which we sort of govern the trading of listed securities. So essentially, that is the gist. In terms of the history of the stock exchange, we can trace it back to 1989.
Okay.
That's where our humble beginnings sort of start from, whereby the market itself was informal, was not regulated. Back then, we were not known as the Botswana Stock Exchange. We were known as the Botswana Share Market. At this point in time, we only had one brokerage firm and 5 listed companies. So at that point in time, it's safe to say that our market was fairly small, unregulated. It was, it had no governance, so to say.
Okay.
In 1994, thankfully, Parliament passed the legislation, the Botswana Stock Exchange Act, which now sort of regulated the securities market in Botswana.
Okay.
By doing so, we now transformed from being the Botswana share market, and we now transformed into being the Botswana Stock Exchange. Later on in that history, as a lot of people do know, we also from 1994, after legislation was passed, the following year in November, that is when official trading started at the Botswana Stock Exchange. In the growth story of the BSC, in 1999, Ernst & Young, they took over the secretarial role of the exchange, and only a full-time CEO was admitted in 2001. So during that point in time, a CEO was admitted, but we still received our sectorial services, so to say, from Ernst & Young, and only in 2003 was a stock exchange fully independent.
Nice.
Now, in terms of the growth story, it does not stop there, because now the BSC is one of the few stock exchanges in Africa which are demutualized. I'll talk about demutualization a little bit later. Definitely. But essentially, we began our story, our demutualization story, from 2005, the 1st of December in 2005, whereby we wanted to transform the BSC from being a mutual non-profit entity to being a for-profit entity, a public limited company, limited by its shares, and of course the Companies Act of Botswana. And through that transition process, we now transformed from being the Botswana Stock Exchange to now being the Botswana Stock Exchange Limited. Now, in terms of the evolution side of things, originally, the BSC was owned by its members, who are the brokers, as well as through the ownership was through proprietary rights. And then the government of Botswana also had ownership in the Botswana Stock Exchange by virtue of provision of subventions. So essentially, we were receiving some financial assistance from the government. So when we transformed from being that mutual non-profit entity to being now a company limited by shares and of course governed by the Companies Act, we now assumed that role whereby we now had shareholders within the company. So now, where we are today in 2021, the Botswana Stock Exchange Limited being a company, the majority shareholder is the government of Botswana. The brokers are also shareholders within the company, and now the employees of the BSC now have a stake, so to say, in the Botswana Stock Exchange. 5% of the BSC is owned by the employees.
Oh, that's
and during that growth story, we've been associated with a lot of international bodies that are associated with capital markets, sort of now publicizing or increasing the profile of the BSC.
Okay.
Now, by virtue of that, we're now able to attract international issuers as well as international investors. Currently, we are a partner, we're an affiliate of the World Federation of Exchanges. We're also a member of the African Securities Exchanges Association, which our CEO is the deputy president. We are also a member of COSA, which is the Committee of SADC Stock Exchanges. Our CEO is also the chairman of that specific association. We also house the secretariat as well. We're a recognized stock exchange with respects to the United Kingdom's Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs.
Okay.
And then also, we're also a partner exchange in the United Nations Stock Exchange Initiative. So essentially, in terms of the history, where we come from, the BSC, in terms of what we do in our history, that is sort of the gist. In terms of developments, we've had a lot of developments in our 32-year history. We're quite a young exchange in terms of age-wise, but there's been a lot of developments that have propelled us to be one of the best exchanges on the continent. I'm just going to note them down, just one by one, right, if it's fine with you. Okay. Most of the developments that we've seen at the BSC, they've come in the last 15 years. It started from 2008, whereby we established the CSD, which stands for the Central Securities Depository.
All right.
And by introducing the Central Securities Depository, we also did away with paper certificates, or rather, that's when we began the process of dematerialization. Essentially, what the CSD's job was to do, or rather, why we established it, it was for it to come through to provide efficient clearing and settlement. But then over and above that role, it was also to dematerialize paper certificates. Essentially, back in the day, when you purchase shares in any BSE listed company, you were given a share certificate or paper certificates, essentially indicating that that is your claim to being a shareholder within that specific company. But the problem with having a physical sort of certificate is that you now open up floodgates in terms of fraud, in terms of theft. Misplacing it is also an issue, and replacing that paper certificate itself was a cumbersome process. So that is why we decided to establish the CSD. In 2010, another development that we've undertaken within this period, we're the first stock exchange outside of South Africa, but within the continent, to list the first ETF, which was the New Gold ETF in 2010. ETF, for those who don't understand, refers to exchange traded funds. Essentially, it's a different asset class that you sort of offer. Most exchanges around the world sort of do that in terms of diversifying their product offerings. When it sort of came into the market, we were only providing equity and debt. So it brought diversity into the market. It excited a lot of Botswana in terms of now being able to invest into a commodity like gold through an ETF like New Gold.
Certainly.
All right, and then in 2012, what we did as the BSE is that we commissioned the automated trading system. Essentially, in prior years, when the BSE was starting off, especially back in the informal days, trading was executed manually. So essentially what would happen is that the brokers at that point in time would come to the exchange house and they would execute client orders manually. So what we did is to sort of be on par with some of our counterparts, we introduced the ATS to sort of supplement the current infrastructure. So that meant that the ATS will now work hand in hand with the CSD system. So now what that sort of provided for us, or the benefit of the introduction of the ATS, was that now brokers can now facilitate trades at their respective offices, number one. But more importantly, now that meant that as the BSE, we can now handle bigger trades in terms of capacity-wise, which is exactly what we want to do. The more trades, or rather the higher the volumes, the more revenue that we have as an exchange. So that is why it was important for us to have this infrastructure introduced to the BSE. Okay. And then in 2017, this was a year after the current CEO took over at Tole, we came up with our 5-year strategy, which is coming to an end this year, whereby we wanted to set out very clear targets in terms of increasing the number of investors in the market, increasing the number of listed companies. We also wanted to diversify the product range, and then of course increase the turnover levels of the BSE. So in that regard, I think we've done fairly well. If not 90% of the strategy, the goals we have achieved, with even inclusive of this disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think we've done fairly well. And towards the end of this year, we'll be working towards coming up with the new 5-year strategy that will take us forth into from 2021 up until 2026. Also in the same year, we also introduced our quarterly news magazine, which we now call BSE News. Essentially what we wanted to do with BSE News is that we wanted to provide a publication, an informative publication for Botswana, whereby they can read about local and international financial markets news. Some people, you know, from a day-to-day sort of perspective, you often find Botswana who want to know about the BSE, but there's a lack of information, or they don't know how to access that information. So we wanted to provide them with a publication that will sort of encapsulate everything that does with the operations of the exchange, as well as other markets out there. And then of course, on the other side, us being a company now that we're demutualized, we also looked at BSE News as a revenue generator for the exchange. So in terms of advertising as well, it's one of those aspects in which we're able to generate some money for the stock exchange. In 2018, the following year, in terms of key developments, was the demutualization that I did speak of. I won't delve into that much. In 2019, there were a few other developments that also happened for us. Number one, we developed, or rather we received approval for the new equity listings requirement, making it more conducive for the market. In doing so, we're able to liaise with market participants for them to sort of give us insights as to how we can sort of make them better, for lack of a better word. And in us developing these new equity listing rules, we gave birth to the TPD SME board. Yeah, essentially prior to that, in terms of listing boards, we always had two main boards, which is the main board for the more established companies that want to raise capital but are more established. That's where you have your commercial banks, your huge retail companies like Safalana and Troppies. And then we also had the venture capital board. But one of the things that we had realized was that these two main boards, the rules themselves were a little bit stringent in allowing certain startup companies, or rather startup companies themselves specifically, to list. So what we sort of did is we established this SME board and we included it as a part of the new equity listings requirements. So now those rules are much more relaxed. If you have a company that doesn't have any operational history, that is the board that you might want to look towards in terms of listing your company. So this
Very interesting, yeah.
So this came into full effect in 2019. And then also in 2019, which was a huge milestone for us as Exchange, we hosted the 23rd African Securities Exchanges Association general meeting and conference, which was held in Kasane. It was the first ever of its kind in terms of us as the BSC hosting a conference of this magnitude, more so that it is the biggest financial markets conference on the continent. So by us doing so, we're able to bring together member exchanges to Gaborone. We also got a lot of sponsors, a lot of support from a lot of from listed companies to other companies that we have good relationships with, and we had the honor and the privilege as well of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Botswana, Dr. Mokwetsi Masisi, who also patronized the event and then delivered the official remarks. So that was a huge milestone for us as the BSC. And then also within that year, we won our first international award for the best educational initiative for the BSc Senior Secondary Schools Finance and Investment Competition.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we won it at the SRP Awards for that specific year. It's a competition that we developed back in 2013. We've been running it every year. It's a huge competition that is popular among secondary school students, because the ultimate aim with that competition is that we're trying to cultivate a culture of investing from a young age. So it was, for us, it was a huge recognition that the global community are able to recognize our efforts on an annual basis. Last year, despite the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, we also were able to achieve certain milestones within our 5-year strategy. Firstly, we revamped our website. I know for many years, a lot of Botswana have complained about the website that we used to have in terms of user experience, in terms of functionalities as well. So we revamped the website. Now it's more attractive, more appealing, more functionalities. We also introduced a mobile application.
Oh, great.
So if you are a user on the go, you want to access market information, you want to get real-time information, you can subscribe to the app as well, and then be able to access that specific information. And then what we also did last year, which is synonymous with a lot of exchanges, is that we also introduced data display screens. I think in other markets, you can either call it that or a stock market ticker. So we introduced a data display screen at Zambezi Tower CBD, and then we also have one, if you visited the BSC office, we have one by our reception desk. Now, the reason for that is that we wanted to provide sort of another channel whereby we can provide, or rather disseminate, information. So essentially, by you passing by Zambezi Towers, you're able to see price movements, indices movements, you're able to see stock market announcements, etc. So for us, it was something that we felt was long overdue, that we needed to introduce into our market. And then another purpose which it serves is that it also provides us with added revenue, in terms of advertising as well. So it also sort of serves that purpose that the BSC News does, our publication, in terms of that. So if you want to sort of reach out to your clientele, you can reach out to the BSC as well, sort of see how you can get your advert on our stock market ticker and see how you can attract clients to your business. So those are the two things that we did last year. But another key development that also we experienced in 2020 was that the BSC became a self-regulatory organization. We received that status. Essentially what that meant is that as the BSC, we now assumed certain functions of a regulation as an independent stock exchange. Some of these things include investigating things like insider trading, market manipulation, approvals of over-the-counter transactions, etc. So now it doesn't only lie solely with MBFIRA as the regulator of the stock exchange. We as well are now capacitated to also follow through on that. And then with this year, in terms of developments, which is the last thing, we are now upgrading our ATS system. I think it's been with us since 2012, we're going to be upgrading the ATS system to make sure that we're on par as well with our counterparts. And then we're also going to be introducing a new CSD system with new functionalities. Some of the things that they'll be able to do will be IPO processing, securities borrowing and lending, e-voting, etc. So these are some of the new functionalities that the old CSD or the current CSD system does not have, but the new one will be able to facilitate. So for us as the BSC, as you can clearly see, in the past 15 years, there's been a lot of growth during that point in time.
Wow, quite a rich history there, from you being the share market and then transitioning to having to depend on government subventions, and then demutualization, and then thereafter you've diversified your streams of income through the data screens and everything. So it's quite an interesting story of growth there. Thanks for that. So now I think let's get into what a lot of people had wanted. This issue of investment and how we can invest on the stock exchange. But firstly, I want you to maybe dispel a myth that might be out there in the public.
All right.
And this myth is that I need to have a substantial amount of money to invest on the stock exchange or to generate a considerable return. Is that true?
It's not true.
It's not true.
I think the one thing that we need to make very, very clear is that the stock market is for anyone, regardless of social class, regardless of level of education, regardless of income. It's for me, if anything else, it is the most convenient investment avenue in the country. Solely based on the fact that if you want to invest into property, you need a substantial amount of money for you to get started. If you want to do something more traditional like breeding cattle, you also need to have a considerable amount of capital to get into sort of that sphere. And with each and every investment that you sort of delve into, there are certain elements of risk and certain elements of returns. But the beautiful thing about us is that from somebody who's a high school student, who's earning 50 Pula pocket money per week or per month, they can come to the market and easily invest into shares. Right now, currently, if we take an example, the BTC stock is 70 Tebe. You can literally come to the stock exchange and buy that with your 50 Pula and be a proud shareholder in BTC.
Wow, with that amount.
With that amount of money. So we don't have, for us to make it conducive and for us to also induce participation in the market, we don't have those restrictions. So essentially it depends on you. And the beautiful thing about us is that we don't have a ceiling in terms of the amount of time that you do invest in the market. You can come invest today and disinvest next week. You can come invest today, disinvest after 20 years, or you can come and invest and, over the time when you're growing your portfolio, if you do happen to pass on, your family members will be able to assume that portfolio that you've left them with. So essentially, for us to start off this conversation, is for me to sort of inform the listeners at home that the stock market is for anyone and for everyone. So they can come see us at any point in time, or our brokers if they're interested in investing.
Wonderful. All right. So now the financial instruments that you guys offer. BSC for investment. Maybe explain each of these in detail, and then tell us what the risk or return characteristics are.
Okay, great stuff. At the BSC currently we have 3 investment products or 3 asset classes. The first one is shares, popularly known as equities. Some people choose to call them equities. And then we also have fixed income or bonds. Some people call them bonds. And then we have exchange traded funds, which also as an asset class is broken down into other categories. So I'll start off with shares. Essentially, shares, as the name prescribes, when you buy shares of a company, you're actually buying a part of a company. So essentially, when we talk about shares, we're actually talking about financial assets that you've bought. You now have financial claim to the profits of a company. So obviously, with shareholding, your returns are sort of governed by the number of shares that you have in a specific company. The financial benefits of investing in shares come in the form of capital gains as well as dividends. But I think, you know what, before I get to that point, I think let me just take it back a bit, just sort of explain why companies come on the stock exchange to list. I think maybe from that perspective, they would understand. The primary reason why companies come to the stock exchange to list is to raise capital. Essentially, what you might find is that a lot of business owners, they go through the business cycle. There'll come a point in time whereby you might want to grow your business, and for that to happen, you may need additional capital. Now, excluding the stock exchange in this conversation, you would assume that you might try to approach your commercial banks or maybe approach the likes of your CEDA to ascertain a loan for you to help you grow your company. But that as well is a process that is not automatic or is not certain for you to happen. You can go to the commercial, obviously by going to commercial bank, you're now looking for debt. If you are able to assume that debt, your company has to do well for you to keep up with payments anyway. If your company doesn't do well, you have a problem on your hands. And for the bank, also at the same time, to assume that risk of borrowing your company money, that's also another conversation altogether. Same thing with the likes of CEDA. So what we provide as the BSC, we provide an alternative avenue for raising capital for business owners. Essentially, in a nutshell, in very, very loose basic terms, business owners, they take a part of that company and they try to sell it out to prospective investors who look at your company and see it as a viable investment option. So essentially, when a company comes to the market, case in point, let's use BTC, because I think I'm using that one solely based on the fact that I think it was the first privatization we went through, and a lot of Botswana are synonymous with it. There was a roadshow that was undertook whereby the prospectus was all over the country, whereby it had detailed information on the company, the strategy, the financials, where the company, how the company sort of sees itself performing in future. So what you do as a prospective investor is that you assess this prospectus, if at all it's going through an IPO process, to see if this company is viable for you to sort of get back some form of returns. And the same thing also happens once a company is also listed. So essentially, when you're coming to buy shares of a company, or rather, what business owners regularly do when investors come to buy shares in that company, they're able to pull those funds together to raise that capital. So Kgotla will come and buy shares of that company, Dumisani will come, Pabo will come. The business owners are able to take that pool of company and expand the business prospects of it. That's why you find companies like Choppies have retail outlets across the country, even in different countries. The likes of Cresta having different hotels in different locations is because they were able to list on the stock exchange, having the owner Mowana buy shares in that company and having them being able to raise those funds. So now getting back to your previous question of the financial benefits, they come in two forms. The first one is capital gains. The second one is payment of dividends.
All right.
I'll start off with capital gains. And I'll start it off by explaining what a price movement means to you as the owner in Botswana. Generally, when you watch TV or you listen to the radio, we're forever talking about price movements. This company share price appreciated by this much, it appreciated by this amount of money. But a lot of Botswana don't understand what a share price means. A share price is pretty much an indicator that sort of shows you how well a company is performing. It's the simple laws of demand and supply, so to say. Generally, when a company does well, it's able to attract investors to it. When it's able to attract them, means demand for that particular stock will increase, and then ultimately the price increases. When a company is not doing well, a lot of investors are going to run away from that company, which means now the demand for that stock is going to go down, and ultimately the price is going to go down. So that is where the concept of capital gains comes into play. Generally, capital gains are only experienced when you disinvest, whereby you want to buy when the share price is low and sell when the share price is high. And that appreciation is due to the performance of the company. Like I was saying, if the company does well, there's going to be a high demand. It's ultimately going to affect the share price. But one of the things that I want to, so essentially, we as the BSC, we do not govern share prices. It is governed by the market, essentially the investors such as you and I. Now, one of the things that I also want to state before I move from capital gains is that when you see a share price go down, it does not mean that your investment has gone down. The market is volatile. You will have those times whereby a share price goes up by 5 thebe, tomorrow is down by 2 thebe. That's the nature of the market. The only time you're supposed to ask any questions is when you see a very drastic fall in the share price, which is normally attributed to something major that would have happened within the company itself. I don't want to mention a name, but there was a retailer that was listed on the BSC a couple of years ago where it had some internal issues. And by virtue of that, there was a huge depreciation in the share price, because those are some of the market forces that you will get to experience within the market. So essentially, the long and short story when it comes to capital gains is that you want to invest into a viable company that you see future prospects with, so that when you do disinvest and you sell your shares, you are selling at a profit and you're able to make some money. If I'm to use an example, let's picture you having 1,000 Pula. You have 1,000 Pula, you want to invest into a company whose share price is 1 Pula. When you buy those shares, you're going to buy those 1,000 shares at 1 Pula per share.
Yes.
Let's assume maybe a year and a half passes by, the company does well. The share price appreciates from 1 Pula to probably 3 Pula. When it reaches 3 Pula, you decide, you know what, I want to disinvest. I don't want to see the share price fall down. That means that now your 1,000 shares, you are selling them at 3 Pula per share, as opposed to the time when you bought it at 1 Pula per share. So ultimately, you've made back 200% interest. You see what I mean? So essentially, that is the thinking with capital gains. But like I'm saying, that is only experienced when you disinvest, when you sell your shares. During that point in time, there has to be some other form of financial incentive for you to keep on buying more shares within that company or other companies that are listed. And that comes in the form of dividend payments. Essentially, dividend payments are your claim to a company's profits. Normally what a company does is that after it finishes its 12-month financial period, they're able to sit down and assess if at all they experience profits. They sit down and discuss how much of those profits are they going to pay out to shareholders, a certain percentage. Normally that payout is governed by what we call a dividend policy. A dividend policy, when you sit down with a broker, each company has it, where it prescribes how many times it pays dividends. Some companies pay twice a year, some once. Some give you an idea as to how much of the profits does that company pay out to shareholders. So what will normally happen is that if a company has gone through that period in time, it's taken a decision, it's going to pay out dividend payments, dependent on your shareholding, you will be able to calculate how much money you're able to get from your returns. Essentially, you'll often see notices in the newspapers or maybe the internet whereby you'll see that Safalana has declared 15 thebe per dividend. You see what I'm saying? Essentially, what that means is that for every share that you have for Safalana, it's going to be paying out 15 thebe. So if at all you have 50 shares in that company, you will calculate how much the company is paying out to sort of ascertain how much you're going to get back in return. Now, a lot of Botswana sometimes are a little bit demoralized by this, because you might find in instances whereby you've invested a lot of money, maybe the dividend payments are quite small. But what they need to understand is that buying shares in a company is like having a piece of cake. If you if you've invested more shares into that company, you have a bigger share of the cake. So the likelihood is that the dividend payments are going to be much better. So we normally often advise Botswana that when you buy shares, instead of receiving dividend payments and take that money and reinvest it into the company, so that you are able to now keep on building on your portfolio. So essentially, capital gains is one financial benefit. The other financial benefit, you'll be receiving dividend payments. The other two benefits, of course, is number three. You, by being a shareholder in the company, you now have voting rights at an AGM. So essentially, you are part and parcel of the company's strategic direction in terms of decision making. And then also the relative ease of buying and selling. I think with other different investment avenues, you might find that it's very difficult for you to sort of liquidate your assets. Case in point, property. You can try to sell a house, it can sit there for more than a year. But with shares, you can buy shares today, you can sell them tomorrow. So essentially, that sort of encapsulates the benefits of investing in shares. In terms of the disadvantages, it's fairly simple. When you invest into a company, you assume the role of being an owner in that company. If the company doesn't do well, there are no returns. Even worse, if the company now sort of is in liquidation, whereby it's getting liquidated, investment. But the truth of the matter is that it's the same with each and every other investment avenue. Risks are part and parcel of it. The other investment product that we have, which
maybe before we get into the second one, I want just maybe for our viewers at home to once again get an appreciation of what you said there. You said the capital gains, if I bought the shares today at 1 Pula, and then perhaps a year after the price goes up to 3 Pula, I'm now selling my shares when I want to disinvest at 3 Pula rather than the 1 Pula. So there's that 2 Pula profit per share.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
And then dividends, this is if this company that I've invested in makes a profit, and depending on their policy, they decide to distribute that cake that you were talking about, to distribute those profits, then I get a share from that.
Exactly.
All right.
Beautifully
Wonderful.
put. Yes.
All right. And so the second one?
The second one is bonds, which is our fixed income investment product that we offer at the BSC. This one, I think for a lot of listeners to sort of understand, is a low risk investment product that we offer. It's low risk with at least with a bit of certainty in terms of the returns that you're able to get from this product. Essentially, what would happen is, in this context, the issuer or the company losing to raise money, ke company e provide a sekoloto. So it's a setup again ke sekoloto.
Okay.
Essentially, what would happen is, let me just use a typical example. Let's assume government today, they want to plug a budget deficit, or they want to undertake infrastructure development. Let's assume they want to build a road or a hospital or a school. And let's assume whichever project they want to undertake requires a considerable amount of money. Let's assume maybe 5-10 million Pula.
Yes.
Now, that being said, it's very difficult for one investor to sort of come through to the market and be able to borrow government that type of money. One option that the government does is to come to capital markets, to come to the BSE and issue what is known as a bond. Yes. So normally what would happen with a bond is that you'd find that the government itself, they want to raise maybe that 10 million Pula that we talked about. And by doing so, they're going to sell a bond in denominations.
Okay.
That is how you are the investor in this situation.
So you're giving this organization a loan.
You're
not actually buying a portion of ownership in it. You're giving it a loan.
You're giving it a loan.
Right.
So in this context, that company money. Normally what would happen with a bond, it has certain characteristics. The first thing, it has a lifespan, whereby the bond itself will mature. When the bond matures, the issuer or the company, it gives you back your principal investment.
Right.
That's the first characteristic. Number two, there is an interest rate or a coupon rate. It's agreed upon at that point in time when you borrow the company or the issuer money. Essentially, I'll even use a typical example. Let's assume for a company maybe denominations of maybe 10,000 Pula.
Okay.
Let's use that as an example. So you find that a company says that is selling a 10,000 Pula bond at 5% for 5 years. A 10,000 Pula bond at 5% for 5 years. So essentially, what that means to you as the investor is that the company, an investor who's able to come and borrow 10,000 Pula.
Yes.
And what the company is promising to do during the specific time, for every year, that interest rate that you agreed upon, that coupon rate, which is 5% in this instance. And then the lifespan of this bond is 5 years. So essentially, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, up to year 5, you're going to be receiving that interest, which 5% of 10,000 Pula is 500 Pula. So ultimately, at the end of that 5-year period, or when the bond matures, the issuer gives you back your principal investment. So the profit that you would have made would have been those coupons that you've been receiving every year in the interim. So essentially, 500 Pula for 5 years is 2.5. See, so a lot of Botswana would somehow, when you sort of talk about bonds, a lot of Botswana always tell you, why would I want to invest in a product with low returns? But the thing is, different products are specific to certain demographics. If you're a pensioner, for example, shares are more risky than bonds. So maybe you might want to invest into bonds. So those are that's why we want to provide a very wide array of products for different types of investors with different risk appetites. In terms of bonds, we have two types of bonds. We have corporate bonds, we have government bonds.
Okay.
If you want to invest in corporate bonds, you can get in touch with your licensed broker. If you want to invest into government bonds, you can contact the primary dealers, which are the 5 big commercial banks in Botswana. Okay. This is your Standard, your Stanbic, Bank ABC, ABSA, as well as FNB. Right now, what we're trying to do, we're trying to make it more accessible for investors, because right now, in terms of the bond market, most of the bonds that we do have on offer are just being held by the asset managers. Yeah, but I think that's a story for another day. And then the other investment or product that we have on offer at the BSE, or another asset class that we have, is Q&A exchange traded funds.
ETFs.
They're the ETF.
All right.
Exchange traded funds essentially is a security that has 2 primary sort of characteristics. It tracks a benchmark index or a price of a commodity. Right now at the BSE, it sort of has, one can sort of say it acts as a unit trust that trades on a stock exchange.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's open-ended and it trades as shares on a day-to-day basis. So right now at the BSE, we currently have 3 ETFs. We have 2 commodity ETFs, New Gold and New Plat, and then we've got the New Funds ETF, which is an ETF that is linked to South African government bonds government bonds in South Africa. So essentially, the beautiful thing about the commodity ETFs is that at times you have investors who have different appetites. They want to invest into commodities like gold and platinum. And you might not know where to go. You see what I mean? So what introducing commodity ETF like New Gold or New Plat does to our market is that it gives the ordinary Motswana access to being able to participate in the commodities market as a whole. Because the New Gold ETF is a commodity ETF that pretty much just tracks the global price of gold.
Okay.
Yeah, essentially,
Right.
when you buy a unit of New Gold, you're actually buying 1/100th of an ounce of a gold bar. So essentially, you are literally buying gold, and you're participating in the exchange of gold around the world. Obviously, like I'm saying, when we do have time, we can always get in depth with that.
Yes.
There are times whereby commodity ETFs they spike due to how situation is, like how last year with so much uncertainty with equities and whatnot, you found that a lot of people are investing in commodities. So that being said, you find a commodity ETF like New Gold is going to spike as a result. So we have the New Gold that tracks gold, and then we have New Plat that tracks platinum. And then we also have the new funds ETF that we also provide. So all of these ETFs, you can access them by also approaching any one of the licensed brokers.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right. So you've spoken there about the shares. You've spoken also about the bonds and the ETFs. And you did say when you began that we can get into or access these investments with whatever amount of money that we have.
Yes.
So the little that we have at home that we've saved, or if you find that you've got some money on the side that you'd like to invest, access the BSC's brokers and get more information from them.
Exactly.
Right. Now, I think what we can talk about is exactly how to access the brokers. Who are they?
Okay.
Where can we reach them?
All right. Currently we have three brokers in the market. We have Imara Capital Securities that are based at CBD. We also have Motswedi Securities that are based at Kali Muse, and then we also have Stockbrokers Botswana that are based in Fairgrounds as well. So you can reach them either telephone, email. They have social media pages as well. Essentially, what their role is that the broker is the person or the individual that provides financial advice to individuals. So essentially, you come to the market, you don't know how the market is performing, what you can invest in. That is the role that they do. They provide that financial advice for free. But more importantly, they facilitate the transactions that happen in the market. They are the ones that execute the trades. So essentially, when you come through to the market, you have an interest in investing in a company. They facilitate the buying and selling for different clients. So they're regulated by the stock exchange. They also are governed by the member rules. So those are the individuals that you meet. So when you want to invest into any BSE listed company or product, you do not come to us directly because we regulate the market. The brokers are the ones that facilitate the transactions and provide that advice to you.
Wow, that's great. And what I picked up from there is that you said, I'm not going into this blindly. Like if I do approach these brokers, they will give me the financial advice. So in essence, you're saying these brokers have analysts who are watching the market and can tell me and advise me as to which companies are performing better or which investments to get into.
Exactly.
Right, so let's take advantage of that. And the brokers give this advice for free.
Yes.
Wonderful. Right, that's very interesting. I think before we break up, you did say that for young people with businesses without operational history, they can somehow list and then gain some funding from the capital markets.
Yes.
Tell us a bit more about this SME listing.
Okay, I think one of the things that I need to just start off with by saying is that anybody can list a company of any size on the stock exchange.
Wonderful.
That is why we have the different listing boards.
Yes.
Essentially, what they're meant to do is to categorize the types of companies that would want to come and list on the stock exchange. What I did mention earlier was that in 2019, with the new equity listings requirements, we gave birth to a new listing board, which we call TPD, the TPD SME board.
Okay.
So essentially, if you want to come to the market and you want to list your company, zero operational history, it's a company that you just registered yesterday, you can come to the market and list. But prior to that, let me just add something of note, just to sort of give people context, because sometimes we mention these things and people don't think they're believable. We had a company, actually it's delisting this year, Finitas Limited.
Okay.
It was on the venture capital board. Venture capital board was meant to accommodate also startup companies, but I think we also realized that some of the rules, they're a little bit stringent.
Right.
So that is why we felt the need to have another one under the venture capital board. What happened with Affinitas was that it was a company that had zero operations. Literally what they did is they had an idea. They had a business plan. They compiled an application to list. They were able to reach out to the asset managers who felt that was a viable prospect and invested money in the specific company. And by them coming to the market with zero operational history, this company was able to raise more than 90 million Pula on the market. Wow. So essentially, this is an example. It can be done.
It's possible.
It's possible. That is why when we tell people about these things, we always inform them that, look, get the necessary information and understand how these things are done. So that's what the SME board is for. It's tailor-made specifically for those companies with zero operational history that want to raise capital and grow their business to have operations. So that's where it is. Now, what we do in terms of facilitating the education, we have different initiatives. We have, from the CPD SME board, we also developed the CPD mentorship program. Essentially, that one is just a way of grooming companies, or rather sensitizing and educating them on the listings value chain. Okay. So what we sort of do is we provide a comprehensive training program that is facilitated by us as well as market participants to help or business owners on how to compile an application to list. Okay. Essentially, when you come to the market to come list, the first person you're going to touch base with is a sponsoring broker. A sponsoring broker is going to sit down with you and assess the viability of your company towards listing. After that, he's going to assist you in compiling an application. This application, you're going to need the help of different sort of market participants. You're going to need your legal advisors, you're going to need your corporate finance advisors, your reporting accountants, you'll also want to approach the asset managers, possibly have an investment pitch, etc. So what we do, we run this program with all of these guys, essentially them educating business owners on their role and how to have a very successful sort of application when you come to list on the boards. So that is a very interesting initiative that we do run. Started back in 2019. This year is going to be the second installment of it. We also have our annual flagship event in terms of the Listings and Investment Conference, whereby what we normally do is we bring different experts, not only in Botswana, but across the region and around the world, whereby they come to talk about just the overall benefits of listing companies on the stock exchange. We involve so many different parties, including listed companies, because as somebody who wants to come to list to the market, it's more beneficial for you to have somebody who's done it before. So you're able to draw insights and knowledge from that and be able to share it with your experience. So if you do have an interest, you are a young person out there and you are having issues of capital, which as we do know in Botswana, we do have a problem with. A lot of Botswana, funding. The stock exchange is a viable option. The CPD SME board is where you can list your company.
Wow, thank you so much for that. Very interesting. Let's get more information about the CPD mentorship program and CPD board.
Yes, sir.
Right, definitely. Yeah. So, Mr. Segwe, we could spend the whole night talking. There's so much information that I feel like we should talk about more, but we're pressed for time. Let me take this opportunity to thank you for taking the time to come here and to thank the Botswana Stock Exchange for believing in youth empowerment through investment and, of course, building the investment culture in Botswana. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Right, so today's 2-minute tip, you know that we're very big on strategy development and having small to medium enterprises including strategies in their plans. Now, as you develop your strategy, you might want to research something called the Balanced Scorecard. Now, the Balanced Scorecard is basically a framework that will have you look at your strategy from 4 different perspectives. And the first perspective is your organizational capacity. Some people call this learning and growth. So you look at the things that your staff can do to learn and grow to build your business. The second perspective is your internal processes. Now, when you look at the internal processes, we're talking about the actions, the functions, and the core decisions that you're making that will make your business sustainable. The third perspective is actually what we call the customer and stakeholder focus. Now here, you're looking at different things that might increase your organization's customer satisfaction and stakeholder satisfaction so that you can build your business. And the last perspective of that balanced scorecard is financial. You're basically looking at your key performance indicators, key performance metrics from a financial perspective that you think are important for you to have a sustainable business. So once again, let's try and research this aspect of balanced scorecard and its perspectives of organizational capacity, internal processes, stakeholder and customer focus, as well as financial. It's been a wonderful show. Thank you so much for your time. From me, Big Budget, and the team that makes it happen, it's good night and God bless. And never forget that you were born for so much more.